The factory floor smelled like coolant and electricity. That was the first thing most visitors noticed, that sharp, metallic scent that clung to the back of the throat, the kind that never fully left your clothes. Harlow Precision Manufacturing ran 3 shifts, 7 days a week. Its parent company, Harlow Industries, had been founded 40 years ago by a man who believed that American manufacturing could compete with anyone in the world if you were disciplined enough and smart enough to automate correctly. His granddaughter, Claire Harlow, now 34, had inherited both the company and the belief. She walked the factory floor on Tuesday mornings, always Tuesdays, always at 9. This was not sentiment. It was strategy. Tuesday gave the weekend crew time to generate fresh data. 9 o'clock was early enough to catch the day shift supervisor before the lunch protocols shuffled the floor personnel. Claire moved through the aisles between machines the way a surgeon moves through a hospital, not hurriedly, not leisurely, but with the specific economy of someone who has decided exactly how much attention each thing deserves. She wore white today. She usually did on inspection mornings. The floor manager, Dennis Kraft, walked 2 steps behind her. He was 52 and had been at Harlow for 19 years. And he had learned to read her pace the way sailors read weather. When her steps shortened, something was about to be noted. When her steps lengthened, the problem had already been mentally filed. Right now, her steps were short. She stopped at Station 7. The reason she stopped was simple. A man was crouched beside the lower access panel of the NX9 injection press, his left arm buried to the elbow in the machine's gearbox housing. He had not heard her approach, or if he had decided the work mattered more than the awareness. His toolbox sat open on a clean cloth beside him, organized with the kind of orderly precision that looked almost ceremonial. Each wrench in its track, each driver standing upright, but his hands were black with machine grease from the fingers to the mid-palm. The kind of grease that takes 3 washings to remove. It had soaked under his nails and into the creases of his knuckles. And when he reached for the torque wrench on the cloth, he left a small, dark print on the fabric's edge. Claire Harlow looked at the print. "Who authorized maintenance on this unit?" she asked, directing the question at Dennis without looking at him. The man in the machine looked up. His name was Ethan Cole. He was 38 years old, with the kind of face that had been good-looking once, and had since settled into something quieter and more permanent. He had worked at Harlow for 14 months, hired through a subcontracted maintenance staffing firm, which technically meant his payroll did not appear on the Harlow direct employee ledger. He wore navy work pants and a gray shirt, with a pen clipped to the breast pocket. He said, calmly, "I authorized it." The feed calibration was drifting. "If it isn't corrected before the noon run, you'll get misalignment on the polymer compression sequence." Claire looked at him properly for the first time. "This floor was just cleaned this morning," she said. "I can see your prints on the cloth." Ethan glanced at the cloth. "I keep a clean cloth so I don't contaminate the components." "You've contaminated it already." "The cloth, yes, not the components." There was a silence. 2 workers near Station 8 had noticed the interaction and quietly stopped what they were doing, the way people stop when they sense that something is shifting in the air around them. Claire said, "We don't operate this facility with people who can't maintain basic standards of presentation. This is a precision manufacturing floor, not a garage." Ethan did not respond immediately. He withdrew his arm from the housing, set the torque wrench down on the clean section of the cloth, and looked at his hands. He turned them over once, as if reading something in them. Then he looked at her. "The NX9 has a bearing misalignment in the tertiary feed shaft," he said. "It's small right now. It won't be small by noon." "We have an engineering team," Claire said. "I know. I sent them a note at 7:15. No one responded. Dennis Kraft shifted his weight, very slightly, behind her. Claire said, "Please collect your tools." The way she said it left no grammatical ambiguity. Ethan held her gaze for one more second, not in defiance, not in anger, but in the particular way of someone who has already understood what is happening and has decided not to fight it because some things are not worth the energy of fighting. He began packing his toolbox. Each tool returned to its assigned position. He snapped the case closed, stood, and picked up the cloth. He folded it so the dark print was inside. "The misalignment is in the tertiary shaft," he said again. Not loudly, just clearly. "The diagnostic log is on the shared drive under my employee ID, E-Cole." Claire was already walking. 2 security personnel arrived within 3 minutes. They were professional and impersonal, which was the only way Ethan wanted it. He walked with them to the east access corridor, through the heavy door that exhaled a rush of outside air, and out into the parking lot, where the morning was still young and pale, and the trees along the perimeter fence had just started to turn. A small white car was parked near the employee overflow lot. Sitting on the hood of it, eating a granola bar and reading a picture book, was a girl of 6 years old named Lily. She had her father's quiet eyes and her mother's red hair, which she wore in 2 braids that morning because her father had watched 3 separate tutorial videos to learn how to do it right. She looked up when she heard the door. "You're done early," she said. Ethan crossed the parking lot. He set his toolbox in the trunk, took off his work gloves, and folded them over the latch. "Came out a little early today," he said. Lily studied him. 6-year-olds are, in certain specific ways, more perceptive than adults, because they have not yet learned to politely ignore what they notice. "Did something happen?" "A few things." "Bad things?" Ethan looked back at the factory. Its face was smooth and modern, all glass and composite paneling, the Harlow logo in clean blue letters above the entrance. Inside, behind those walls, a bearing in the tertiary feed shaft of the NX9 was continuing to drift, accumulating misalignment with every cycle of the press. "I said what needed to be said," he told her. "Come on, let's get you to school." He had filed the report at 7:15 a.m. It was not an informal note. It was a properly formatted service ticket submitted through Harlow's own maintenance management platform, the same platform the company had paid $340,000 to implement 2 years ago. The ticket included the machine ID, the nature of the fault, the diagnostic readings from his handheld sensor, and a risk escalation flag he had manually set to amber, which in the system's own documentation meant requires attention within 4 hours. By 8 o'clock, the ticket had been viewed by 3 people: the day shift supervisor, the assistant floor manager, and a junior process engineer named Brandon Walsh, who was 26 and 7 months into his first professional job. Brandon had looked at the diagnostic readings, frowned at them, then looked at them again. They were consistent with what Ethan had described. The bearing drift was measurable. It was not yet catastrophic, but the numbers were trending in one direction. Brandon opened a new email to Dennis Kraft, typed 2 sentences, then deleted them. He opened a direct message to the lead engineer, Marcus Teal, then closed it. He navigated back to the ticket. He marked it as under review, a status category that was not precisely the same as being reviewed, but looked similar in the dashboard summary. Then Claire Harlow arrived for her inspection, and then Ethan Cole was escorted from the building, and by 9:40 the ticket was still marked under review, and the NX9 was still running its calibration cycle, feeding polymer through a compression sequence that was, with every repetition, asking a question of the tertiary feed shaft that the bearing was finding slightly harder to answer. At 9:47, the morning shift hit its peak production window. This was the hour when all 5 primary lines ran concurrently: the injection press, the thermal bonding unit, the high-tolerance milling station, the composite laminate press, and the automated assembly line that fed into the cleanroom packaging cell. In full operation, the 5 lines processed approximately $2.3 million worth of contracted component orders per hour. The facility's largest client, a medical device manufacturer in Minnesota, had an order due for fulfillment by Friday. 60% of that order was still in production. At 9:51, Brandon Walsh walked to the NX9 and stood in front of it for about 40 seconds. The machine did not look different. It sounded, possibly, very slightly different. A faint resonance in the low registers of its cycle noise that might have been nothing. Might have been his imagination, or might have been the bearing doing what the diagnostic said it was doing. Brandon put his hand lightly on the housing. The vibration was normal. He was almost certain it was normal. He walked back to his station. At 9:57, the NX-9 faltered. It was not a dramatic failure. Machines rarely fail dramatically all at once. That is mostly something that happens in cinema. What actually happened was that the bearing in the tertiary feed shaft reached the outer edge of its tolerance window, and the automated systems detected an output deviation, and the safety protocol triggered a micro-pause as 0. 3-second hesitation in the compression cycle. That hesitation propagated. The injection press fed directly into the bonding unit's intake queue. A 0. 3-second delay in output became a 0. 3-second gap in intake, which caused the bonding unit's queue management system to flag an irregular load timing event. The bonding unit slowed by 1 cycle. The milling station, which coordinated its speed with the bonding unit's output rate, slowed by 1¼ cycles in response. The composite laminate press, which had no direct mechanical link to the other units, but shared the facility's integrated power management system, detected the load balancing adjustment and recalibrated its draw accordingly. All of this happened in 14 seconds. Then the NX-9's control system, having paused and recalibrated, attempted to return to standard operating speed. The bearing, now past its tolerance limit, could not maintain the tertiary shaft alignment at standard speed. The deviation widened. The safety protocol triggered again, this time a full stop. The NX-9 stopped. The cascade took 11 more seconds to complete. One by one, in the specific order their coordination protocols determined, the other units stopped. The floor did not go dark. The lights stayed on. The ventilation kept running. The cooling systems kept cycling. But the machines, all 5 primary lines, were still. The automated assembly line's conveyor belt slowed to a halt with a soft mechanical sigh. The milling station's spindles wound down. The bonding unit's intake queue displayed a flashing red hold indicator. The silence was strange, not peaceful. More like the silence of a chest that has stopped rising. The first call went to Dennis Kraft at 9:58. By 10:02, Dennis was on the floor, and by 10:04, he had already understood enough to know that he did not know enough, which is the specific kind of understanding that most people spend a great deal of energy trying to avoid. He called Marcus Teal, the lead engineer, whose office was in the building's west wing, separated from the production floor by approximately 60 meters, and the considerable psychological distance of having a separate HVAC system. Marcus arrived in 4 minutes. He was 44, with the lean, precise manner of someone who had been solving engineering problems for long enough that he had come to expect they were solvable. He looked at the diagnostic panel on the NX-9 for 30 seconds. He looked at the cascade log. Then he looked at Brandon Walsh, who was standing at the edge of the work zone, holding a tablet that displayed the original service ticket. "This came in at 7:15, Brandon said. It was flagged amber. Marcus looked at the ticket. He did not say anything. He turned back to the machine. "The bearing is past spec," he said. "We can't restart the NX-9 without physical intervention. And until we do, the downstream units stay in hold protocol." "How long?" Dennis asked. "If we have the right replacement bearing in inventory, and it's a clean swap, 45 minutes to an hour." "Do we have the right bearing?" A pause. "I'll check." They did not have the right bearing. The NX-9 used a proprietary bearing assembly sourced from a German supplier, and Harlow's inventory of that specific unit had been reduced 3 months ago as part of a cost optimization initiative that had reduced the parts storage budget by 18%. There were 2 compatible units in the regional distribution center in Cincinnati. Ground shipping, 14 to 16 hours. Express, 4 to 6 hours, at additional cost. Marcus reported this to Dennis at 10:23. At 10:24, Dennis called Claire Harlow. She was in a board meeting on the 3rd floor. She took the call in the corridor, standing near a large window that overlooked the parking lot, and, beyond it, the pale tree line along the perimeter fence. "How long?" she asked. "Best case, if we expedite the part 4 to 6 hours before the NX-9 is back up. Then restart sequencing for the other units. Testing, recalibration, you're looking at 7, maybe 8 hours before full production resumes." Claire was quiet. "The Lindstrom order," she said. Yes, there was a penalty clause in the Lindstrom contract. If delivery missed the Friday window by more than 24 hours, Harlow was liable for a 2% reduction in the contract value, which on a $4.2 million order was $84,000, and the possibility of a performance review that could affect the contract renewal in November. Who had the original service call? Claire asked. Another silence. The maintenance subcontractor. Cole. The name landed without commentary. Claire looked at the parking lot. What are our options without waiting for the part? That's what I'm looking into, Marcus said. But by 10:35, when he had pulled the technical schematics for the NX9 and cross-referenced them with the diagnostic log Ethan had filed, Marcus Teal had a slow, unpleasant realization. The diagnostic was thorough. It was more thorough than his own team's standard diagnostic protocol. It included measurements from access points his engineers rarely used, readings from secondary sensors that most technicians did not bother to correlate. It reflected an understanding of the NX9's internal architecture that was not casual. He pulled up Ethan Cole's personnel file from the staffing agency's shared directory. He read it for about 3 minutes. Then, he went to find Dennis Kraft. The file was not long. It was not meant to be the staffing agency used condensed formats, 2 pages maximum, focused on certifications and recent employment history, but what it contained was specific enough to be unambiguous. Ethan Cole, age 38. Previously, Senior Systems Engineer, Kellner Automated Solutions, Chicago. Prior to that, Lead Design Engineer, Precision Dynamics Group, where his listed responsibilities included. Marcus read the phrase, twice development and maintenance protocols for the NX series injection press line. He had worked on the NX series. He had not merely worked on it. He had, based on the dates and the position description, been part of the team that designed the maintenance architecture for the machine now sitting silent and stopped on the floor below. Marcus set the file down on Dennis's desk. Dennis read it. His jaw moved once, like he was going to say something, then didn't. Why is he working maintenance subcontract? Dennis said, finally. This was not the most urgent question, practically speaking, but it was the one that came naturally because it was the one that made the least sense. People with Ethan's credentials did not generally end up on maintenance subcontract at manufacturing firms. The money was wrong. The status was wrong. The work, while technically demanding, was not the kind of work that a person with a decade of senior engineering experience sought out unless something had changed in their circumstances. Something had changed in his circumstances. But Marcus didn't know what yet. And it was not the most pressing issue. We need to talk to him, Marcus said. Dennis said, Claire. I know. I'll talk to Claire. He found her in the ground floor operations center, standing at the central monitoring station, reviewing the cascade log herself with the kind of focused attention that suggested she had already understood the mechanical sequence, and was now trying to understand something else, the shape of the decision tree that had led here, and where along it the turn had been wrong. Marcus put the file on the console beside her. She read it standing up, without picking it up. Her eyes moved at the same pace they moved when she was reading quarterly reports systematically, without visible reaction. He designed the maintenance protocols for this machine, she said. Essentially, yes. She did not respond immediately. Marcus had worked with her for 3 years, and he had learned not to try to read her silences. They were working silences. The kind where the actual processing happened, and interrupting them was like interrupting a calculation halfway through. Where is he now? She asked. He dropped his daughter at school. After that, I don't know. Another pause. Get me his contact information, she said. Claire. His contact information, she said again, quietly, firmly. In exactly the tone that meant this was no longer a discussion of options, but a direction. Marcus got her the number. She looked at it for a moment. Then she did something that Marcus had not expected. She put the number in her pocket, walked to the elevator, and pressed the button for the parking level. She drove herself. She knew the address from the personnel file. It was in a part of the city she rarely visited. Not impoverished, exactly, but the kind of neighborhood where the houses were close together and the yards were small, and every driveway had at least one vehicle in it that looked like it was being worked on. She drove her gray company car through streets that became progressively narrower and more residential, past a school with a chain-link fence where children were playing at what appeared to be late-morning recess. She did not entirely know why she was doing this. She had options. She could have had someone call him. She could have had HR make contact through the agency. She could have waited to see if Marcus's team found a workaround, or if the express-shipped bearing arrived fast enough to matter. She was not the kind of person who made in-person visits to subcontractors' homes. That was not a standard business procedure. She had built her career in part by understanding which rules were arbitrary and which represented genuine structural wisdom, and the rules around maintaining professional distance from hourly workers were not arbitrary. But she drove herself anyway. The house was a pale yellow bungalow with a covered porch. There was a bicycle on the porch, small and pink, with training wheels that had been removed but not thrown away. They sat beside the front door in a way that suggested their removal had been recent and perhaps commemorated. There was a window box with herbs in it, basil and something else. She parked and sat in the car for a moment. Then she got out and walked to the door. She knocked. She heard footsteps from inside. And then the door opened. And it was not Ethan Cole who answered. It was Lily. The girl looked at her with the frank, unfiltered assessment that belongs exclusively to children below a certain age. She had her braids from the morning, slightly looser now, and she was wearing a t-shirt with a dinosaur on it. She held a picture book against her chest. "Hi," she said. "Hello," Claire said. "Is your father home?" Lily studied her for a moment longer. Then she turned her head toward the interior of the house and called, "Dad." "There's a lady." She did not specify which lady. She did not need to. She had recognized Claire from the factory that morning, and her tone carried a careful neutrality that was not hostility, but was not warmth, the way a very young child's tone becomes careful when they are trying to be fair about something that hurt them. Ethan appeared from down the hallway, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. He was in different clothes now, dark jeans, a plain white t-shirt, work boots still on because he had apparently not yet fully decided the day was over. He looked at Claire without surprise, which surprised her. "I expected a phone call," he said. "I thought this was better," she said. "May I come in?" He looked at her for a moment, the same kind of looking she did with her reports, assessing something specific, then stepped aside. The interior of the house was small and clean and had the particular character of a space that is organized by someone who has made deliberate decisions about it, rather than someone who simply has enough room. Books were shelved by category. Tools were visible in the hallway closet, arranged on a pegboard. On the kitchen table, a mechanical toy, some kind of metal puzzle box, was spread out in pieces, next to a small set of fine tools. Lily had apparently been watching him work on it. Claire sat at the kitchen table, uninvited, because the alternative was standing awkwardly near the door. "The factory is down," she said. "You know that." "I assumed. We're waiting on a replacement bearing. 4 to 6 hours. Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if she wanted one, and set one in front of her. She noticed that he did not pour it in any performative or pointed way. He simply made coffee the way someone makes coffee when there is a guest, because that is the ordinary thing to do. "The bearing is the immediate problem," he said, sitting down across from her. "But it's not the only problem. Tell me the other problem." He wrapped both hands around his mug. His hands were clean now. Or nearly clean, the knuckles still faintly shadowed where the grease had worked into the skin. He looked at them for a moment. "The NX-9's calibration drift started about 3 weeks ago," he said. "I logged it. I logged it again 10 days ago. The drift rate was accelerating, not dangerously, not yet, but in a clear trend. The bearing failure this morning was not sudden. It was the end of a gradual process that 3 separate maintenance logs described in some detail." Claire said nothing. "The logs were in the system," Ethan continued. "They were accessible to your engineering team. Marcus Teal has been in that system every week. I can see the access timestamps on shared documents. Either no one read the logs, or someone read them and decided the bearing could wait until it became convenient. This was not delivered as accusation. It was delivered as technical fact, in the same level, precise tone he had used on the factory floor. Claire found to her mild discomfort, that this was more difficult to hear than anger would have been. "There's a third possibility," she said. "Yes," Ethan said. "Someone made a cost decision without understanding the cost." She looked at him. "The parts inventory reduction," she said slowly. "3 months ago, your procurement team cut the storage budget for NX series components. The replacement bearing is in Cincinnati. That decision was made by someone who did not connect the maintenance log data to the inventory model, or by someone who did connect them and chose not to act on it." A silence. Lily appeared in the doorway, looked at both adults, deemed the situation stable, and retreated again. "Why are you doing this job?" Claire asked. Not as a question about today, as a question in general. Ethan looked at the puzzle box on the table. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said. "Lena. She had ALS. It moved fast, maybe 18 months from diagnosis. I was project lead at Kellner when she got sick. I took leave. When the leave ended, I didn't go back." He turned the coffee mug once in a circle. "Lily was 4. She needs a parent who is present. Not someone flying to client sites 3 weeks a month." He looked up. "The subcontract work pays enough. It's close to home. I can adjust my hours when she needs me." "It was a practical decision," Claire said. "You gave up a career that you were clearly—" "I didn't give it up," Ethan said. "I set it down for a while." Another silence. Longer this time. "The factory," Claire said finally. "Can you help us?" "I know what's wrong," he said. "I know how to fix it. And I know how to prevent it from happening again. But there are things I would need." "What things?" "To work without interference. Not from Marcus, not from Dennis, not from you. When I'm working on a system, I work on the system." "Agreed. And I want to talk to you when we're done. Not about my position here. About how the maintenance logs are handled, and who is responsible for connecting procurement decisions to technical risk assessments." Claire looked at him. This was not, she noticed, a demand for reinstatement, or for a higher rate, or for an apology. It was a demand for a structural conversation about a process failure. It was, in some fundamental way, more serious than any of those other things would have been. "Agreed," she said. They drove back to the factory in separate cars. Ethan dropped Lily with the neighbor across the street, a retired teacher named Mrs. Novak, who had watched Lily on short notice more times than either of them could count, and who asked no questions beyond, "Is she eating lunch?" He told Mrs. Novak he would be back before dinner. He was not entirely certain of this, but he thought it was likely. When he arrived at the factory, Marcus Teal was waiting at the east access door. Marcus said, "I read your personnel file." Ethan said, "I know. A beat. I should have read it before today," Marcus said. "I should have read your service ticket before today." "You should have," Ethan agreed. "But you can beat yourself up about that after the NX-9 is running." This was not forgiveness. It was not absolution. It was simply the prioritization of immediate problems over emotional processing, which was one of Ethan's more consistent characteristics, and which Marcus, who was also an engineer, recognized and respected. They went inside. The floor was strange in stillness. Workers stood at their stations or along the walls, waiting for direction that had not come, with the particular blankness that descends on people who are accustomed to constant motion when the motion stops. Claire arrived 3 minutes after Ethan. She stood at the edge of the work zone. She did not come closer. She had said she would not interfere. Ethan set his toolbox down and opened it on the clean cloth, the same cloth, newly unfolded, his print still at one corner. He did not rush. He walked around the NX-9 once, all the way around, looking at it. Not at the diagnostic panel, not at the control screen at the machine itself. At its housing and its connections, and the small physical signs that accumulate in a machine that has been running under strain. He put his hand on the housing in 2 places. He crouched and looked at the undercarriage. He stood and looked at the intake feed geometry. Then he crouched beside the lower access panel, the same position Claire had found him in that morning, and went to work. The floor was quiet enough that the sounds of his work carried. The specific clicks and torques of correct tool application. the occasional soft verbalization of a number when he was checking a measurement against memory, the 30 seconds of complete silence when he was thinking through a sequence. Brandon Walsh stood nearby, tablet in hand, half hoping to be useful and half hoping not to be addressed. Because when Ethan finally did speak to him, the request would reveal exactly how much he had missed. It did reveal that. But Ethan made the request without cruelty, which Brandon would think about for a long time afterward. At 12:14, Ethan stood up. "The bearing's gone," he said. "We can't restart without the replacement. But there's a secondary issue I can address right now that will reduce your restart time once the part arrives. The tertiary shaft housing has developed surface corrosion at the bearing seat minor. But if you install the new bearing over it, you'll have reduced service life on the replacement, and you'll be back in this position in 4 to 6 weeks. Marcus said, "What do you need?" 30 minutes and about $40 worth of supplies that you should have in inventory. They had the supplies in inventory. He worked for 27 minutes. When he finished, the bearing seat was clean and properly prepared. The NX9 would not run until the part arrived. But when the part arrived and was installed correctly, it would run for the full duration of its designed service life. The bearing arrived at 2:40 p.m. Ethan installed it. At 3:18 p.m., the NX9 restarted. The cascade restart took 40 minutes, because each unit had to be brought back in sequence and verified before the next one was activated. At 3:58 p.m., all 5 primary production lines were running. The cleanroom packaging cell reactivated at 4:06 p.m. The floor exhaled. It was not a metaphor, exactly. The sound of the machines returning the low harmonic accumulation of 5 large industrial systems operating in their designed coordination was something that everyone present felt in their chest before they heard with their ears. Workers who had been standing at the walls for 6 hours moved back to their stations. The conveyor belt began its circuit. The milling station spindles climbed back to operating speed. Ethan washed his hands at the maintenance sink. The grease came off in layers, the way it always did, requiring 2 applications of the industrial solvent and then soap. His hands, when they were clean, showed the history of the day in the faint shadows, still at his knuckles. The residual, that would not come fully out until the following morning. He dried his hands and walked to where Claire was standing. They sat in the ground floor conference room, which was not the kind of conference room where boards met. It was a working room, with a whiteboard on one wall and a table that had coffee ring stains that the cleaning crew could never quite remove. Marcus was there. Dennis was there. And, because Ethan had asked for her to be included, so was Priya Nair, the procurement manager, who had arrived with the careful composure of someone who already suspected what was about to be discussed. Ethan had brought a folder. Inside it were printouts of the 3 maintenance logs he had filed over the previous 3 weeks, the original service ticket from that morning, and a 2-page summary he had written at his kitchen table in the time between Claire's visit and their drive back to the factory. He set the folder on the table. "I'm not here to assign blame," he said. "I'm here because you asked me what went wrong, and I can tell you what went wrong. And if you want to prevent it from happening again, you need to understand all of it, not just the bearing." He walked through it methodically. The maintenance log data showed a clear trend over 22 days, bearing drift accelerating at a measurable rate. The logs had been filed in the system and accessed by multiple members of the engineering team. The issue was not that the data didn't exist. The issue was that there was no established protocol requiring anyone to act on amber-flagged maintenance tickets within a specified time window. The tickets existed. The review process did not. Priya Nair, to her credit, did not wait to be called on. "The inventory reduction," she said. "I approved it. The NX series bearing was in the parts category that was flagged for reduction because historical replacement frequency was low." She paused. "The historical data didn't account for the current calibration trends because the calibration trends weren't being surfaced to my team." "Correct," Ethan said. "So the procurement decision was based on incomplete information." "Also correct," Claire said. "The missing link is between the maintenance data and the procurement model, and between the maintenance data and the engineering response protocol," Ethan added. "You need someone, a person, not a system whose explicit responsibility it is to look at amber flag trends over time and connect them to procurement and scheduling decisions. That person didn't exist here. The system flagged correctly. Nobody acted on the flag. The silence that followed was the kind that means people are recognizing something they had not seen before. Not because they were looking away from it, but because the structure around them had been built in a way that kept it invisible. Marcus said, "We've been operating on the assumption that flag systems are self-executing. That if something gets flagged, the relevant person will see it and respond. Most systems operate that way," Ethan said, "and most of the time it works. It fails when the flag volume is high enough that individual flags get absorbed into the noise, or when the flag crosses a departmental boundary, maintenance to engineering to procurement, and each department assumes one of the others is acting on it." Dennis said, quietly, "Diffusion of responsibility." Yes, Claire had been looking at the 2-page summary throughout this exchange. She turned the second page over. On it, in Ethan's precise handwriting, were 5 recommendations. They were numbered, brief, and specific. "You wrote this at home," she said. "This morning." While the coffee was brewing, she looked at the recommendations. They were not complex. They were, in the way that practical solutions often are, almost obvious in retrospect: an amber flag response protocol with named owners, a cross-departmental weekly review of high-risk maintenance trends, a revised parts inventory model that incorporated maintenance trend data, a mandatory escalation path for flags that were not actioned within 4 hours. She looked at Ethan. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "Not subcontract. A direct role. Systems reliability. You'd have oversight of maintenance protocols, procurement coordination, and engineering alignment. Senior level." She named a figure. Ethan looked at the table for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. "But I don't need the senior role. I need work that's flexible enough for me to be home by 6 most evenings, with the ability to adjust when something comes up with my daughter. The subcontract structure gives me that. A senior position won't." He paused. "What I want isn't the title. It's what I described in that summary. Someone to own the flag response process. Someone to connect maintenance data to procurement. That's what the factory needs. You can hire someone for that, or you can redesign the process so it doesn't require a single person. Either way, it needs to exist." A long pause. "I'll also ask," he said, "that the people who carry those dirty cloths around this floor, the maintenance crews, the line technicians, are treated as if they understand the work they're doing, because usually they do." No one in the room spoke. Claire said, "I'll do both." He looked at her. "The process," she said. "And the other thing." 3 weeks later, the factory floor was running its Tuesday morning shift when Claire came down for her inspection. She wore dark clothes this time. She walked the same route she always walked, but more slowly now, or perhaps more attentively, which looked like slowness from the outside but felt, internally, like a different kind of seeing. She stopped at stations to ask questions that were not rhetorical. She read the maintenance displays that she had previously passed without acknowledging. She learned, over the following weeks, to distinguish between the sounds of machines operating well and machines operating under the first signs of strain, a skill that was partly technical and partly the accumulated attention of someone who had decided to pay it. The Lindstrom order shipped on Friday. It shipped late by 8 hours, which triggered a contract review conversation but not the penalty clause, because Harlow's legal team had correctly identified that the delay was the result of a supplier-side parts delay rather than a production failure. A distinction that the contract language, fortunately, supported. The contract renewed in November. Ethan returned to the subcontract work. His schedule was the same. His rate was adjusted upward by a figure that was modest but meaningful. And his maintenance logs were now reviewed weekly in a cross-departmental meeting that had been given a named owner, a standing agenda item, and per one of his 5 recommendations, a summary that went directly to the COO's office. He did not attend those meetings. He was not asked to. The work that needed doing was the floor work, the hands-in-the-machine work. And that was the work he did. Lily turned 7 in November. She had a party with 6 children from her class, which Ethan organized with the same methodical competence he brought to everything color-coded invitations, a cake he baked himself from a recipe he had found, and annotated in handwriting in the margins, games he had tested in advance to verify they worked for the age group. He was home by 5:30 every day that week. On a Tuesday in late November, he walked with Lily past the factory on the way to the park. The building's face was the same glass and composite, the blue letters above the entrance, the same pale light behind the windows. The morning shift was running. The sound of it, even from outside, had the low harmonic quality of systems in coordination, multiple complex things working together in the way they were designed to work. Lily said, "Is that the place?" "Yes." She looked at it for a moment. She had her mother's red hair loose today, because she had decided braids were for school days only. "It looks normal," she said. "It mostly is," Ethan said. They crossed the street toward the park. Claire Harlow, who happened to be standing at a third-floor window reviewing a production report, looked down. She saw a man and a girl cross the street. The man was carrying a small backpack, and the girl had red hair and was walking at the uneven, unhurried pace of children who have not yet learned to feel guilty about taking time. They did not look up. Claire looked back at the production report. Then she set the report down, picked up a marker, and wrote at the top of a blank section of her weekly process review document, "Flag Response Protocol Check Status with Priya." It was not a large gesture. It was not meant to be. Some things are maintained precisely because someone, every week, decides they are worth maintaining, not because the maintaining is visible or celebrated, but because the alternative is the sound of everything going still. She picked up the report again and read on.